Now, when you came here today and you walked through those doors, who came here with the expectation that you would hear a presentation on the highly important and extremely important skill of flea training? No one? But yes, I'm just going to repeat that. I said flea training. Those tiny little insects that harass our pets. Anyone? Well, fortunately for you, you're in luck because I, Norman Lee, am a self-proclaimed, professionally certified trainer of flea trainers. And today I'm going to share my knowledge and skills with you. The late, great Zig Ziglar used to tell the story of how to train fleas. And then the story itself goes a little something like this. To train fleas, you need to place them into a jar with a top on it. Once those fleas are in the jar itself, they do what fleas do and they jump. So the fleas are in the jar, they jump, they hit their little tiny flea heads on that top. Over and over again, the fleas jump and they hit their tiny little flea heads on that top. Over time, as you continue to observe those fleas, you notice that while they're still jumping in the jar, they no longer hit their heads on the top. The fleas, based upon that experience from hitting their heads on the top, they have conditioned themselves to no longer jump as high. So to prove that you have been certified as a flea trainer, you can remove the top from that jar, and those fleas will continue to jump, but only at the newly conditioned height. Those fleas are literally inches away from freedom. However, they remain in the jar. Who here, besides me, has ever had an experience in your life or experiences where you've jumped, you've hit your head? You've jumped again, you've hit your head again, eventually leading you to stop jumping altogether, or you simply jumped with less enthusiasm. I don't know about you, but I have had those experiences. Even when the circumstances change and that metaphorical top is removed, you no longer jump, but you remain in your jar. Like those fleas in the flea story, you have become conditioned and you have developed a limiting belief about your abilities. Now, limiting beliefs are defined as false beliefs that we acquire as a result of incorrect information that we tell ourselves. They are those thoughts such as, I'm a failure, I can't succeed. Similar to Melissa's presentation, age, right? What are people thinking about my age? I'm not old enough to do this. Or simply, it's impossible. There are also those thoughts negative thoughts that we tell ourselves that, I'm a failure, I'm not good enough, no one loves me. Either way, when we have these beliefs, they create this self-fulfilling ceiling or top that we place upon our abilities, and we stop ourselves from being our full and true selves. Proverbs chapter 23, verse 7 states that, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So if you believe in your heart that you are not worthy, that you are less than, or you cannot achieve a goal, that absolutely becomes true. For 17 years of my life, I lived in a neighborhood called the Bottom. Now, as you may imagine, a neighborhood called the Bottom doesn't have very many affluent characteristics to it. On occasion, I had the opportunity to go spend the night with my uncle and hang out with my cousins. They lived in a much nicer neighborhood. After one such weekend of spending the night there, my uncle took me home. But on the way home, he made a stop at a bank. So he went through the drive-thru, completed his transaction, and as he was putting that ticket away, I had the opportunity to take a glance to see what was on that ticket. And on that ticket itself, I saw the most amazing thing that I had ever seen up to that point in time in my life. That ticket had a balance of over $3,000 on it. And in my young mind, I thought, wow, Uncle Jimmy is rich, right? One day I too will have an account like Uncle Jimmy with $3,000 in it. In that moment, while I had no clue what I was doing, I set a goal for myself. Now, let us fast forward a little bit, a few years, and I was at a point where I was doing bank reconciliations. So I was looking at bank statements month over month in, month out, looking at these wonderful bank statements. And as I reviewed these statements, I noticed a pattern on each statement. And the average balance, statement over statement, was approximately $3,000. Now, for those of you who may know me, you probably can attest to this, but I'm an analytical person. I like to dig in. Just that answer is not enough. So when I saw that, I thought it was strange, and I decided to do some research to find out, why is this the case? Why is it not higher? I want more than $3,000. What is that, right? So I dug in and did some research. And as I continued to look at the statements, I noticed another pattern. And the pattern I saw was that whenever that account grew from $3,000 to a greater amount, my expenditures increased as well. And whenever that $3,000 balance dipped, I became super conservative. So both of those behaviors led to that balance coming back to $3,000. Now, that wasn't an answer for me either. That led to more questions and more curiosity. So I dug in some more, did some additional research and some self-reflection. And eventually, over time, the answer came to me as bright and clear and beautiful as a wonderful Denver day. I thought back to that trip to the bank with Uncle Jimmy. Now, this is something that I had not thought about since that day, right? So when it happened, it just opened my eyes to the goal that I set as a kid, somehow internalized within inside of me and manifested itself into a limiting belief about finances. It amazed me. A goal changed itself into something that dictated my behavior unconsciously. My extremely awesome, talented, beautiful wife, Linda, and I are the proud parents of 3 kids. Our oldest son, Jalen, is 17. Our daughter, Jakira, is 16. And our youngest son, Norman, is 12. His nickname is Cube. A while back, when the kids were approximately 6, 4, and 1, Jalen and Jakira shared a room together. And in that room, they had stacked bunk beds. Now, Jalen was assigned to the top bunk, and Jakira had the bottom bunk. Even though Jalen was assigned to that top bunk, that bed rarely had the pleasure of Jalen sleeping in it because he was afraid to sleep in that bed. One day, when the 5 of us were just hanging out at the house, because I'm an extremely awesome father, I noticed that Cube was missing. So I went looking for him. I am, aren't I? So I went looking for him. And my first stop was in Jalen and Jakira's room. So when I walked into that room, there he was, that 1-year-old fat cheek chubby baby, playing and laughing and having a great time all by himself in that top bunk. Now, as I stood there watching him play, I was shocked, stunned, and frightened all at the same time. I thought, okay, how did he get into the bed? 1. Second, how did he learn how to get into the bed? Because remember, Jalen wouldn't go up there, and no one else went up there. And third, is he going to fall out of that top bunk? So I went over, hid my fear. Hid my fear, and I pulled him out of that bunk. Pulled him out of the bunk, we went about our business. But don't you know, that little 1-year-old found himself back in that top bunk over and over and over again. Now, what was the difference between our then 6-year-old Jalen and our 1-year-old Cube? For whatever reason, that 6-year-old developed limiting beliefs and fear around that top bunk. I don't know if it came from an experience that he had or from his overprotective parents. If it is the overprotective parents part, I blame Linda, but don't tell her I said so. On the other hand, we have this 1-year-old who had zero fear or limiting beliefs about that top bunk. As a matter of fact, he climbed up that ladder and turned that top bunk into his own personal private playground. Now, these are just a couple of examples of personal limiting beliefs that have impacted our lives, my wife, my family lives. But throughout time, mankind has also had several limiting beliefs as well. For example, and some of you may be able to relate to this one because not that long ago, human beings believed that the world was flat, right? And if you sailed too far, you would fall off the edge of the planet. That limited how far people would actually sail during that time frame. People believed that we would never be able to travel through the air in a vessel that was heavier than air itself at one point in time. Less than a century ago, humans thought it was impossible to send a human being into space and to bring that human back to Earth safely. Doctors and experts around the world deemed it physically impossible for a human being to run a mile in under 4 minutes without their heart exploding. Now, we all know that all of these things, plus much, much more, have been accomplished. But why? These things have been accomplished because it took someone, somewhere, to be bold enough not to accept what was commonly accepted as reality. And this is one of the keys for overcoming and defeating a limiting belief. You must first identify that that belief exists. Second, review the source of those beliefs. And last, rewrite the story. As human beings, we own our destiny. We don't have to be held back or held down by beliefs of others or those negative self-talk beliefs that we tell ourselves. Now, before I leave, I have one more story to share with you. And this is really a test for the audience. Is there anyone out there besides myself familiar with or a fan of Carlos Santana? Okay, so we have a few cool people in the audience, and that's the group I'll be hanging out with later. The rest of you, I don't know. But Carlos Santana, for those of you who don't know him, the easiest way for me to describe him is that he's just a bad man. He is a guitarist. He fuses Latin, blues, jazz, and rock in his music, and he's really awesome. Carlos was born in Mexico, and his father was a professional violinist in a mariachi band. His father taught Carlos how to play the violin, but he didn't care for the violin, so he self-taught himself the guitar. While in high school, we had a band, and they played around town. And the day before graduation, Carlos received that question that most seniors receive. We have a senior, so we're getting that question as well right now. What are you going to do next, right? So his response to the people that asked him that question was, I'm going to hang out with the likes of B.B. King and Eric Clapton one day. And the responses that he received was resounding laughter. People told him, that's impossible, you can't do that, you're crazy. But fortunately for the cool people in the room that like Carlos Santana, he chose not to accept the limiting beliefs that those people attempted to impose upon him. As I said earlier, we can get limiting beliefs from others, but in this case, he chose not to accept that. Carlos continued to practice and play with his band, and eventually, after a few years, he got a break, and he got a chance to play in this little small music festival known as Woodstock. Once he played in Woodstock, it set his career on fire, and today he has sold over 100 million albums. Once again, why? He chose not to accept the limiting beliefs that were being placed upon him. There's an old saying that the sky is the limit. But as we're gathered here today, we all know that's not true. Right now, as I speak, there are footprints on the moon. People deemed it impossible to send a human up there and bring them back. You can take a trip from New York City to LA on an airplane in less than 7 hours. And being here in Denver, this wonderful outdoorsy runner's paradise, people run a mile in under 4 minutes almost every day, and they're still alive. Standing in front of you is a man that lived in the bottom for 17 years. And statistically speaking, I should not be in front of you today. My body lived in the bottom, but my mind did not dwell there, and thank God for wonderful parents who would not allow me to limit myself. As I leave today, I want you to remember 3 things. We don't have to be held back by limiting beliefs at all. To overcome them, identify that it exists, review the source of that belief, and lastly, retrain your fleas to jump out of your jar because your top has been removed. Thank you.